This is Gemara Pesachim Daf Lamed Tes. Today's shir is chos for Eilu Neshama, as well as all the learning for this entire month of Tevis for Leah Rasha Bas Leib, as well as our Leib and Yaakov. The Neshama should have an Aliyah, of course. Olachayim Chamim Ben Malkid Meir Ben Kir Men Ben Vega Chaim Ben Sar Son Sivin Rezil Zar Baskinad Ben Zin Chai Sai Chim Zar Esa Yosol Ben Indol. Elijah Finish of Leah Shama Snavim Shafiu Fi Chad of Rodovani Tivit Nav Khan Rezil. The bracha was Tevi Musa from Suman Ash Esim Michal Tivah Besteli Yehuva V'Soy Sha'ar Chali Yisrael, as well as Chosiva with Aliyah Bas Ita, as well as a shout out to a wonderful group of 12-year-old boys, believe it or not, that have started the Shas with us and just got notice from Rav Menachem Katz. And he is still going strong. Can you believe it? So anyone who is still getting a little weak should take chizik. And Rav Menachem, Mirz Hashem, you should continue learning together with the entire Chabura. And we're looking forward to celebrating your bar mitzvah with the whole Chabura. We pick it up from a Gemara in Pesachim Daf Lamed Tes. We did matzah, we did chametz, and now we are up to maror. Says the Mishnah, Lamed Tes Amanal, Ve'ilu Yerakos. These are the following vegetables. Shadam Yotzidem Nechavasa Bepesach. They are Yotzi Yerchiyim for maror, Bechazeres, with Chazeres, Betamcha, Ubecharvina, Ubeulshin, Ubemar. All these items, some of these items, we'll try to give a little bit of a translation. The items that we have a bit of a translation, other items we're going to keep with the Gemara words. Yotze behem, you're with these items, bin lachim and bin yaveshim, moist or dry. Avaloy kvushin, but not if they're preserved. V'loy shlukin, not if they're in a stew. V'loy muvushalin, not if they're cooked. Okay, they can be moist or dry. They can't be stewed, cooked, or preserved. And all these different items are combined together to equal the requisite kazayis. V'yotzin as well, yotzin bekelach shalahem, with their stalks. Ubedemai, and with demai, meiser rishai shenala trumasa, meiser sheni v'aktish sheniftu. The last half of the Mishnah we'll deal with is really the same thing as the previous Mishnah is meiser rishai, they took off their truma, etc., etc. But now we start dealing with the first part of the Mishnah. What are all these different vegetables? It says the chazaris is chasa, is lettuce. Ulshin is what? Hindavi, which is a type of grass. Tamcha, Amar Rabba says Rabba Rachana, tamachta shema. Its name is tamachta. Charbina Amar Shimon Lakish Asvasa Dedikla, which is the type of vine that goes around the vine tree, grows on a pine tree, Ubemarar is Marirta, some sort of bitter herb, wild lettuce type of situation. Says the Gemara. The following items we eat with on Pesach. Be'ulshin, ubetamcha, ubecharchelin. All these different items, becharvinin, ubechazrin. Rav Yehuda Imer Af, Ulshay Sada, the wild type of Ulshay, not the regular Ulshin, as well as Ulshay Gina, as well as the garden type of Ulshin, the Chazaris, and our lettuce, and our Chazaris. All these different items you could be Yitzay Mar with. Ulshay Gina, the Chazaris, the garden ulshin and the chazaris. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. That was very repetitive. Rabbi Yehuda said again, Ulshay Sada, Ulshay Gina chazaris. Says the Gemara, Ulshay Gina v'chazaris, Hatan ale Reisha. Already said those in the Reisha. Says the Gemara, this is what Rabbi Yehuda meant to say. Hachi Kamer. Af Ulshay Sada, ki Ulshay Gina v'chazaris. That Ulshay Sada, this wild type of Ulshay, that maybe one would think as a different din. No, that is the same din as the garden type of Ulshin, as well as the chazaris. Comes along the Gemara in the last narrow line. Reb Meir Omer says Reb Meir. Even asvis vitura, umar royar, again types of vegetation. Armali Rav Yosi says Rav Yosi asvasis vitura, as well as Atzvasis Vitura is Echaru. That's one type of item. Umar, what is Mar? Zeu Yiruar. That is Yiruar. Tanit Rav Yishmael says Rav Yishmael. Ilu Yirakish Ad Miyotzven Yechavas BePesach. The following vegetables you are to with on Pesach. Bechazeres, Be'olshen, Ubetamcha, Ubecharvinin, Ubecharginin, Ubehordafnin. All these different items, or Dafnin is type of wormwood. All these different items you're yoytze with on Pesach. Rav Yehuda Imer Av Chazeres, even our good old fashioned Chazeres, Yulin V'Chazeres, Colin. Different types of lettuce leaves, different types of chazaris. Kiyotzban are similar. Rav Ela Amar Misham Rav Elazar, Av Akrabolin, even Akrabolin, which is Rashi says is some sort of ivy, a thick ivy that grows around the date palm tree. And says the Gemara about Rav Ela, the name of Rav Elazar, Chazarti al Kol Talmid, I went looking for everyone, Ubekashli Chaver, and I wanted to find a friend, I wanted to find an opinion that holds like me. V'loy Matzasi, I didn't find anyone. Ukshabasan there of Lesbian Yaakov, and I came from Lesbian Yaakov. Hoy Dilidvara, he admitted to me that I was correct. Rav Yehuda Omer, Kol Sheish L'Sraf, anything that has sap. Again, we're continuing the different types of vegetations, different types of plants and lettuce that you're yaitzi your mitzvah with. Says Rav Yehuda, any item that has sap, you're yaitzi with. Yochanan ben Broika Omer, Kol Shepanav Machsifin, any time it has its appearance is machsif and is a greenish, a pale green. You can be yaitz with achirim aimrim, kol yerek mar, any bitter vegetable. Yesh leisarav has sap. Upanam machsivim says achirim. These two dinim go hand in hand. It has sap and as well it's pale. It has this pale green complexion. Amar Rav Yechon Medibri Kulan Nelmad. From everyone we learned as follows: Yerek mar yesh leisarav upanam machsivim. Like we just said, that this bitter herb has both sap and the pale complexion. Amar Rav Halacha gacherim. That is halacha. That is what you could use to be yaitse. Excuse me. That's what you use to be yaitse the mitzvah. Says the Gemara. Ravina ashkechel Ravacha brei derava. Ravina found Vach, the son of Rava, that he was looking all over for what? Amarirta, from bitter herbs. He wanted to find really bitter, really tear-inducing maror. Amarle, he said to him, I don't understand. What are you looking for? Something that's very bitter, something that's going to make you cry. Now we learned chazares. Chazares, lettuce. Utanat very small. Chazares. Very small learned chazares. What did Rabbi Isha teach us? Mitzvah chazares. The mitzvah chazares. Ve'amar Rava. And Rava explained, now you're wondering, okay, you're right. I was looking for this bitter stuff. You told me 3 places. The Mishnah, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Isha, all said chazeres. Comes like Rav, and Rav explains why chazeres. My chazeres chasa is a type of lettuce. My chasa. Why are we having lettuce? The chas rachmana ilavan. It's a play on words. Chasa comes from the word of chas. We want to have lettuce. We don't necessarily want something very bitter. We want something that's called chasa because Hashem had mercy upon us. Why was Mitzrayim compared to Mar to these bitter herbs? To teach us Mamar is that in the beginning it's soft, the Seifei Kasha, at the end it's going to be hard. Mitzrayim, so to the Mitzrayim to Chazarak, in the beginning they took care of us, they paid us, the Seifei Kasha. And then at the end it was very bitter. Amar Lei, so we responded. This was Ravina. This was Ravacha Brei. The Rava responded after all these lengthy opinions that proved you don't need to necessarily have the most bitter item. Hadri Bi was Chayzer, and that is the reason why many people know that the Iker mitzvah, the most important, is to have the lettuce, and not necessarily the very bitter stuff. There is a Chazinish that points out that you want it to be a little bit bitter. You want to have some bitterness to it, but that is the reason why the lettuce is certainly as l'chatchila, perhaps even more l'chatchila to the tear-inducing maror. Says the Gemara. Amar le Rav Chumi la Abaye. Rav Chumi says to Abaye, maror min yeraku. How do you know that the word maror is a type of vegetation? Ema marir to the kufya. Maybe it's the gall of the kufya, which type of fish. Says the Gemara, we know it's a vegetation, dumya de matzah, similar to matzah. Ma matzah gedulei karka, mar gedulei karka. The Torah puts matzah together with mar to teach you, just like matzah grows from the ground of wheat, so too mar is a vegetation that grows from the ground. Says the Gemara, ve'ima hirduf, maybe it's referring to a hirduf, which is some sort of bitter plant. That what was here, so Rashi explains, that was the item that Moshe Rabbeinu threw into the Mei Marim to turn the bitter water sweet. They threw in this bitter plant. Says the Gemara, Dumya de matzah, again has to be comparable to matzah. Ma matzah min zerayim, Amara min zerayim, has to be a type of zerayim, a type of vegetation, and not a tree trunk. Ve'ema here zifu, says the Gemara, maybe it's this vegetation which is poisonous to animals. Maybe that's what we have to eat. Says the Gemara again, Dumya de matzah, ma matzah nichel b'kesa meiser. Matzah is something you could buy with the money of meiser. Marsh nichel b'kesa meiser. You could buy with the money of Meiser, and this plant, which is poisonous to animals, would not be considered something that is edible that you could buy with the money of Meiser. So that is the conclusion of the Gemara. That has to be chasa, that has to be a plant, and not necessarily does it have to be the most bitter item. About 8 lines from the bottom. Ema marar chad. Maybe it means there's one type of maror. We had a whole list of all these different marors. How do you know? Maybe it's just one. Says the Gemara, mararim ksiv. It says it in the plural. Says Gemara, it says in the plural. Vema marim trey. Okay, it means 2. Plural. Dumya de matzah. Similar to matzah. Ma matzah minim harbe. Just like we saw in the previous Mishnah, matzah could be wheat and barley and spelt, etc., etc. As long as it wasn't rice or millet. So to have mar minim harbe. Amar Rav Rav Huna, continuing on this theme. Amar Rav, Yerakish Amar Chachamish on the the vegetables that you yait your chiyav of mar with kulon and nizra'in baruga achas. Says the Gemara, Rav Rav Huna, the name of Rav, a different type of din. All the different types of bitter herbs that we just listed in the Mishnah, The tamcha, the charvino, the ulshin, the mar, etc. You're allowed to plant them all in one aruga on one patch. Says the Gemara, what does that show us? The last misham kalayim. Seemingly, there's no din of kalayim. Kalayim is the isser to plant two different types. To plant wheat with our grapes is kalaya karim. You cannot plant them together. Seemingly, all these different types of mar, you're allowed to, yes, plant together. Says the Gemara, Masav Rava. What does it say? And Rava asks. It says in the Brisa, chazeres v'chazeres golin. Two different types of chazeres. Ulshin. The Olshei Sada, leek, Olshen and Olshen of the field. Krishin, which is leek, Ukrishei Sada, and the field leek. Kuzbar, which is coriander, Kuzbei Sada, and the coriander of the field. Chardol, which is mustard, Chaldar Mitzri, and Egyptian Mitzri. The last gourd, Udalasa Mitzri, and the Egyptian gourd. The Harmusi and the Harmusi one. All of these items, says this Brisa, Einon Klayim Zebizeh. Okay, says the Gemara, says Rava, asking his question. You just told me all the different types of mar allowed to be planted together. We have this Brisa, this unique case of the Brisa. Chazaris, Golden, Olshen, Sadi, Krisha, Sada. Says the Gemara, says Rava, you know what this Brisa means? Chazaris, v'chazaris Golden, in those two items, seemingly they were pairs in the Brisa. Those two items you can plant together. Chazaris v'Olshen Lai, but seemingly you cannot plant any type of these marars together. So how did we just say a moment ago that you're allowed to plant any of these marars together? Maybe you'll tell me you're learning the Brisa wrong. Maybe the Brisa meant you could plant them all together. No. Rav and Rav learned Zugai is Ketani. No, it's clear in the Brisa. Chazaris Kolin, Olshin, Sada. Each one was a pair. So the pairs you could plant together. But you cannot plant them all together. So why are you telling me that? Why is Rav Huna Marav teaching me, Rav Huna Marav, that you're allowed to plant any of these vegetations together? Answers the Gemara, my Nizram, what does that mean? Damarav, Nizra'in kil chasan. It means you could plant them according to their halacha, tanina. That is what it means. It's a Nizra'in kil chasan. It can be planted according to the halacha, which we'll see in a moment what that means. Says the Gemara, kil chasan tanina. You're telling me it can be planted according to halacha as we flip over to Lametesam and Beis. Aruga, what does it mean, kil chasan? Aruga, and this should hopefully sound familiar. If you have a patch which is 6 by 6 tfachim, we have this in the Gemara Shabbos. Zarim b'seicha chamisha zarayim. You're allowed to plant inside this 6 by 6 patch 5 different types of items. Arba garucha is 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 on the 4 sides of our square. Haruga of the patch. Vachasem Zayin, one in the middle, one smack in the middle, and therefore these 5 are allowed to be in one patch. So why are you telling me a special din? Seemingly by the Mar, you're allowed to plant them in one patch. What are you talking about? It's a regular din. They always can plant this. We knew this already. Answers the Gemara, the first teretz. I would have thought on immediately maybe from the Mishnah and Klayim and the Gemara and Shabbos, we would have thought only by Zerayin, but not by vegetables. Kamashman, that even by vegetables like the Mar, you could also plant these different 5 inside one batch of 6 by 6. Says the Gemara, 5 lines down, Lametesam Beis Lamemra. Is this to teach me Diarakos Alima Mizraim? Sounds like Yerakos were a bigger chiddush. We had a Mishnah that taught us you let to plant all these Zerayim together. Now you're teaching me a bigger chiddush. You can even plant Yerakos, which would show us Yerakos are alima. They're stronger. They give more. They suck more out of the earth. So it's a bigger chiddush that you can plant them together. Now we learned in the Mishnah, Kol mine Zerayim in Zerayim ba'aruga achas. You're not allowed to plant all the different types of Zerayim plantation together. Kol mine Yerakos Zerayim ba'aruga achas. But vegetables you can less plant together. So what's going on? So what do we see clearly? We see clearly that vegetables are on a lower level. So if we already learned from the Mishnah that you can plant all different zerayim together, certainly you can plant the Yerakos, the Mar together. So we're back to our original question. Why do you have to teach me that you can plant all the Yerakos together? Answers the Gemara, I would have thought, Hani Marar min Zerayim ninu. You'd have thought that maybe Mar is a type of Zerayim, Kamash Malah, and therefore teach me that no, Mar is a separate entity. Mar is a type of Yerakos, and that is the Chiddush that still you're allowed to plant them together. As Rashi, look at Rashi, 3 lines into the narrow lines, Rashi says, what was the Havamina? Hani Mar means Zerayim v'lo yizru ba'aruga achas. Maybe you would not be allowed to plant them together. Kamash l'ravdim and Yerakos nenu ben Israel, and you can, yes, plant them together. Says the Gemara, so what was the Havamina? The Havamina was that Mar is a type of Zerayim, a type of seed. Says the Gemara, Zerayim salkadaytach, you thought Mar was a seed. But then I learned to the Mishnah, Yerakos. The Mishnah said vegetables. But then Bar Kabara, Yerakos, vegetables. Shmuel, Yerakos. So what's going going on? What was your havamina that you thought it was like a seed? Answers the Gemara, Chazares, it's Richle. The Chiddush is the Chazares, this lettuce. Since at the end of the day it's going to turn hard. So maybe when you're planting it, maybe it gets the same din as a Zrayim that has to be wider apart because it's going to turn hard at the end. As we see, Lavam Rav Yosina teaches Rav Chanina, Kelech shall krov, the stalk of cabbage, shall hoksha, that at the end will turn hard. You have to plant it farther apart. Alma, so what do we see? That that anything which will eventually harden, it needs to have more room separating it because of the dinam of kalayim. So you would have thought, so you would have thought by us also that these maras, since eventually this chazaris, this lettuce will turn hard at the end, therefore maybe gets the same din, and therefore you cannot plant 5 different species in one 6x6 patch. Kamash Malon, that was the Chiddush Rav Avuna Marav, that you could plant them in the patch. Okay, so we started today with all different types of vegetation from Mar. We continued by proving that the chazaris, the chasa, the lettuce, is even better because chas rachman Hashem and mercy on us. And the mitzrayim are first not so difficult, and then they turned bitter, and that's even better than something bitter. Then we went on to prove that all these different types of bitter herbs you could plant in one patch of 6x6. The chiddush of this on top of Zerayim was that there is a differentiation over here, and that even though it's going to turn hard, it does not need extra room to plant it. Says the Gemara. Now we move on to the next part of the Mishnah. What was the next part of the Mishnah? All these different types of marar, whether they're moist, whether they're dry, you're yaitze your mitzvah of matzah with them. Amar Rav Chisda, about 20 lines down, the 2 dots, or to be easier, about 8 lines, 10 lines before the white lines. Amar Rav Chisda, lo yishanu ella bekelech. That's only with the stalk. Avol ba'olin, but the leaves, lachen in yaveshim mai. If you're using the leaves, they gotta be moist, not dry. Says the Gemara, 1 second. But the end of the Mishnah says, bekelech shalan, you be able with their stalk. Bechal the reisha, the first part of the Mishnah, alin, it's talking about their leaves. Says the Gemara, the obvious teretz, perusha kamefarish. So explaining itself. Ki katani bein lachem in yaveshin hakelech. When does it say it could be whether moist or dry? Is only on the stalk, but on the leaves it has to be moist. Meisvei, says the Gemara, and that's the dinner of Chisda, that the leaves have to always be moist. Meisvei asked the Gemara, you're yaitzi with them the leaves and with the stalks, being lachem in yaveshin devira meir v'chacham ma'imrim lachem yoitzim behem yaveshin ein yoitzim behem. So we have machlekes Rameir and the Chacham v'shavin. Both Rameir and the Chacham agree she yoitzim behem kemushim. You're yaitzi if they are withered, avuloi kemushim, not if they are preserve v'loi shlukin v'loi mevushalin, either if they're in the stew or if they are cooked. Klalei shal davar, concluding this brayso, kol sheyesh boi tam marar yoitzim boi, v'chol she'ein loi tam marar ein yoitzim boi. So says the Gemara, we see clearly this differentiation. Answers the Gemara, tirgma akelach. We thought that this whole brayso proves to us that there's no difference between the leaves and the stalks. Answers the Gemara, tirgma, that whole brayso we just quoted was akelach, was referring only to the stalks, but the leaves will have a different din, like Rav Chisda taught us, that you only be yaitz if the leaves are moist and not if they are dry. Says the Gemara, second white line, Tanur Rabbanan. Ein yoitzim behem kemushim. You're not yoitze if they are withered. Misham Rav Lazar, Rav Sadik, Amru yoitz behem kemushim. You're yoitze if they're withered. Ram Bar Chama has a question. Taking off of yesterday's Gemara, a beautiful segue. Are you allowed to be yaitze with the Mar Meiser Sheni? We spoke about the Matzah Meiser Sheni. What about the Mar? Says the Gemara. Nice Chazar again. Ali, but Rav Akiva loyti by Lucha. It's not a question. Why not? Hash to be Matzah Deoraisa. No, fake Rav Akiva elder. Yes, yaitze with Matzah Meiser Sheni. Be Mar Derabanami boy. Of course, we yaitze with Mar. According again, because Rav Akiva learned that they potentially could eat it. Why? Because if it comes Tommy, Rav Akiva by the Matzah, you can redeem it. What's the question? Leave the Rav Yezia Galili. Maybe by matzah din daraisa. That's when basically says you're not yaitz with matzah meiser sheni. Avomar derabanan nothing. Maybe you're yes yaitz with mar or dilma. What's the other side of the coin? Called the gin rabbanan gin daraisa talking. Every derabanan is patterned after the daraisa, and therefore you're not yaitz. Amar Rava mistavra matzah mar matzah is put together with mar. It's not on the 3rd, 4th, 5th time that we've seen this equation, and therefore just like Rav Yisrael is going to tell us, you're not yaitze with matzah, you're also not going to be yaitze with marar of Meiser Sheni, whereas according to Rabbi Kiva, you will, yes, be yaitze. That was the beautiful and fascinating discussion of Marer. Before we call it a day, let's just begin the next Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, you're not to soak the bran for the chickens. But you're allowed to put it to scalding water. Ha'isha, woman, like this, she cannot soak the morse in the bran. That's in order to bring it to the bathhouse. And again, the Gemara is going to explain all these dinim. But she's allowed to take this bran and rub it onto her skin when it's dry. You can't choose up wheat and put it on your mak, on your wound, with some sort of remedy. Why? Because by chewing up the wheat, combining it with your saliva, it makes it machmitzas, it makes it turn into chametz. Tan Rabbanan, let's just begin the Gemara. Ilu dvarim she'ein boin lidei chibutz, that does not become the chametz ha'afui v'amavushal, baking and cooking, v'chalat, and scalding. And scalding something shechalta b'roislim, when you scald it with boiling water. So now that's a brisa. Says the Gemara, mavusha. What does it mean cooking? Ad mavusha lei bechama. Ask the Gemara that when you cook something, I don't understand. Ad mavusha lei bechama. When it ferments, it should turn to chametz. So why are you telling me it doesn't ever become chametz? Cooking it, she has to make it chametz. Amar Abba ha'afui shebishleika amar. It means if you do both, it means that when you bake it after you cook it, that's when, or I should say, bake it and then cook it, that's when it's not going to become chametz. And Tanya, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Omer, kamach, flour, shenavel delif, that it's dripping into the flour. Afilu koliyam kulai. In a bladei chametz, not chametz. Why? Amar Abavu, David, tip, tip. Means it's a continuous drip, so never has a moment to turn to chametz. That is the beginning of this new sugya of the sharing the morsin, of this turning into the chametz by turning it into from your saliva for the makkah, with the drips going into it. We'll pick it up from here.